Hi, Namaste. My name is Henry Jediker. I'm a French-Canadian therapist, filmmaker, and the president of a non-profit Canadian organization called Om Illumination. Today, I am presenting to you a movie that I have made about the process of self-inquiry as taught by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. In 2014, I had the great opportunity, blessing, and privilege to interview Mr. David Godman, who I consider to be the greatest scholar on the process of self-inquiry and on the life and teaching of Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. I also had the blessing to interview Dr. Reinhard Jung, who has dedicated his entire adult life to the process of meditation and is now one of the greatest teachers of self-inquiry in the world. Before you watch this movie, please download the booklet Who Am I for free on our website omillumination.com. If you get great value from watching this movie on self-inquiry, you can buy the movie for $5 on our website. We are presently preparing more movies and videos on the process of self-inquiry, enlightenment, and self-realization, and your donation will be used 100% to spread more information about enlightenment and self-realization. Thank you very much.
His teaching is simply put.
Yes.
Every one of us has one universal heart. Only one heart, whether you are a worm or a man or woman or animal, there is only one universal heart in all of us. So everything is same. So you have to know that who is that one. It is in the heart center. To know that, you should know who you are. That is the inquiry. You think you are a man I think yeah, that lady is a lady like that. But actually, who are you? To know that, you should go inside. You would find in the heart, you are that. You are the universal heart. Everything is the same. You call me Maharshi, but when that thought goes, both of us are Maharshis. He used to say.
Yeah.
That is his teaching. So everything in the hall, you will be absolutely natural. I am told he used to keep the hall open during night. Cheetahs wild animal, used to be there here. It would be open. They would come to him, he would talk to them and they would go back. One Kunjaswami, a devotee of Bhagavan, told me he used to sleep in the hall. He heard one night Bhagavan talking. He got up to see a huge cobra with a raised hood was in front of him. He was telling the cobra, "Hey, go away. The people who are sleeping will be afraid of seeing you. Go away." He saw the cobra slithering out. Whether you are a cobra or a man or a woman or all the same for him. Because he was also seeing the same heart in the cobra also.
In 1974, I was at Oxford University, not particularly enamored of the course I was on, and spending most of my money, and money I didn't have, on spiritual books at the university bookstore. Every week I would go down there, buy a new book, take it home, read it, and all those books ever did was activate my curiosity to go out and buy another book the next week. Then one day I was down in the bowels of this bookstore in the Oriental section, and I was just putting my finger along the row of books, and somebody on the other side of the stack of books was doing the same thing, and that person must have pushed their side. And so on my side, one particular book fell out, and I caught it in my lap, and that was Arthur Osborne's Teachings of Ramana Maharshi in his own words. So I thought, that looks interesting, that's my book for this week, I'll take this home and read it. So I paid my money, I went home. I probably read it in about 2 hours. The difference in this book and the effect it had on me was that when I finished, there was no desire to go out and read any more books. There was something about getting the teachings of Bhagavan directly from his mouth, if you like, in his own words, that he took away all my interest in anything else, in finding any intellectual solutions to spiritual problems. He also put me in a state of silence, the state that his teachings were pointing at and indicating, and there was a kind of peripheral knowledge that if I did ever have any questions, then there was something so perfect, so complete about his worldview, his explanations of the world, how it functioned, what the mind was, how it appeared, how it disappeared, that whatever questions I might at some future point have, there was something in this system, in this set of ideas, which satisfactorily answered them all. But at that moment, I didn't need answers to questions. I didn't have any questions, because simply reading Bhagavan's words cut out the necessity of having to do anything to find peace, find silence, do a practice to attain a result. Those words themselves put me in the state which his books were pointing towards. I'm sitting in Palakottu in Annamalai Swami's ashram. A few minutes ago, Henri and I were discussing off-camera Bhagavan's work, Who Am I? He produced a copy and he's asked me to say a few words about it. This is the booklet, I would say, because it's only a few pages long, that contains everything that you need to know to start the practice of self-inquiry. This work originated when Bhagavan still lived on the hill around 1902. At that time, he wasn't speaking to people who came. If people came with a question, if he wanted to answer, he would write with his finger in the dirt outside the mantapam where he was staying. So this devotee called Siva Prakasam Pillai arrived and hit on the topic that Bhagavan most wanted to talk about, which was, who am I? Siva Prakasam Pillai asked this question, and Bhagavan was inspired to have a dialogue with him. Because he wasn't speaking, he wrote with his finger in the dirt. Sivaprakasam Pillai remembered most of the answers because they weren't that complicated. I think he wrote the last one down, and the rest he wrote down at home from memory. This particular dialogue then languished in his notes for about 20 years, and in the early 1920s he wrote a verse biography of Bhagavan, and at the end of it he just thought, well, that was a nice conversation I had in 1902, I'll just tack that on as an appendix. So the appendix appeared, the book came to Ramanashram. Devotees liked it because it was a very simple, straightforward primer on what Bhagavan's teachings were, both theoretical and practical. Devotees liked it so much it became published as a separate pamphlet, still in its question and answer form. And then in 1926, Bhagavan himself took a hand. He took this dialogue and he rewrote the whole thing in the form of an essay. So this is really the only prose work he ever wrote. Self-Inquiry, which has his name, was actually written by somebody else. So he sat down and wrote all the points that Sivaprakasam Pillai had noted down. He reformulated them in a single continuous prose work, and it was still entitled Who Am I? It doesn't exclusively cover spiritual practice. It's about the nature of world, the nature of happiness, what the mind is, and so on. But it does contain a very key section on how to do self-inquiry. When people came to see Bhagavan after the publication of this essay and asked about his teachings, quite frequently he would send them to the bookstore and say, read this little booklet, you'll find everything is in there. And if you still have some questions afterwards, if you want more elaborations, come back and we'll discuss it. So this was the primer, if you like, the help manual for Bhagavan's teachings that all beginners were asked to go through before they came back to Bhagavan and asked for further instructions. Now Bhagavan was so, let's say, enamored. He liked this little presentation so much, he asked his brother, the ashram manager, to subsidize it, to make sure that no one would be priced out of having a copy. It went on sale at incredibly cheap prices, below the cost of printing in many cases. He also encouraged devotees who were bilingual to bring out editions in other languages. So for perhaps the last 25 years of Bhagavan's life, this particular text was on sale in Ramanashram as the basic primer of Bhagavan's teachings and the first step on how to do self-inquiry for everyone who came in whatever language they spoke. My advice is Bhagavan's advice. Before you watch the film, go to this little booklet, acquaint yourself with Bhagavan's teachings, and then listen to what I have to say about them. This is Bhagavan telling you how to get enlightened, and it's all you really need in life. Now, I'll throw one more story in before I read one extract. I have a friend who lives in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and she said, I have no idea where this book came from, but one day it plopped through my letterbox. There was a photo of Bhagavan, and there was a Hebrew copy of Who Am I? She said, I went through it, and I was a devotee of Bhagavan for 17 years after that, without feeling any need to come to India to find another book, to find another photo. I looked at these 10 pages and I thought, that's all I need to know in life. I have my picture, I have my presentation of the teaching, and I have my practical advice on how to realize the self. I'm happy, I'm content, that's all I need. Henri was asking, what is Bhagavan's simple, most basic message on how to do self-inquiry? And here it is. Question 9. What is the path of inquiry for understanding the nature of the mind? To which Bhagavan replies, that which rises as I in this body is the mind. If one inquires as to where in the body the thought I rises first, one would discover that it rises in the heart. That is the place of the mind's origin. Even if one thinks constantly I, one will be led to that place. Of all the thoughts that arise in the mind, the I thought is the first. It is only after the rise of this that the other thoughts arise. It is after the appearance of the first personal pronoun, I, that the second and third personal pronouns appear. Without the first personal pronoun, there will not be the second and third. And the next question is, how will the mind become quiescent? To which the answer is, from Bhagavan, by the inquiry, who am I? The thought, who am I, will destroy all other thoughts and like the stick used for stirring the burning pyre, it will itself in the end get destroyed. Then there will arise self-realization. Then this is the crucial question about practice. The question is, what is the means for constantly holding on to the thought, who am I? To which Bhagavan replies, when other thoughts arise, one should not pursue them, but should inquire, to whom do they arise? It does not matter how many thoughts arise. As each thought arises, one should inquire with diligence, to whom has this thought arisen? The answer that would emerge would be, to me. Thereupon, if one inquires, who am I? The mind will go back to its source, and the thought that arose will become quiescent. With repeated practice in this manner, the mind will develop the skill to stay in its source. So those are Bhagavan's instructions on what you have to do. Now that's not the end of the story. This is a two-way transaction. What Bhagavan is saying is, if you can make your eye go back to its source and abide there, then you invoke the power of the Guru, the power of the self, and ultimately it's this power which is going to suck your quiescent eye thought into its source and destroy it. What Bhagavan is saying you have to do is, through repeated practice, take your sense of I back to its source and hold it there in such a way that nothing distracts it, nothing makes it want to go out and follow a thought. If you reach this state of effortless, thought-free I sense, then this I will be abiding at its source, but this is not liberation. This is simply the I offering itself up in a way as a sacrifice to the self. When this I no longer has any impetus to move out, when there's no momentum to chase a thought, then the power of the self will reveal itself to that I thought, it will suck it into itself, it will destroy it, and liberation will result. Your job is to take the I back to its source and hold it there. The power of the self acting through the Guru, its job is to take hold of that I and destroy it once you've done that initial process.
How is self-inquiry for you? Would you like to speak about your experience?
I started doing self-inquiry in Britain, having read Arthur Osborne's books, Teachings of Ramana Maharshi in his own words. I picked up the basic technique from him. I started practicing while I was in Ireland, Britain, Israel, but I was never quite sure how to do it properly. There didn't seem to be a simple ABCD set of instructions in any ashram book, and having been here for close to 40 years, I now know there isn't an ABCD book available at Ramana Ashram. It's something you pick up from assimilating the totality of what Bhagavan has to say on this subject, absorbing it into your being, following the advice, and basically working it out for yourself. It's a bit like riding a bike. You don't figure out the intricacies by reading a book. You get on, you fall off, you get on, you go a bit further before you fall off, and then slowly you get the hang of it. And there's no way you can explain it to other people other than say, get on the bike, push off, and figure it out for yourself. So Bhagavan himself wasn't that interested in giving detailed instructions on how it should be done. Somebody who persisted was told by Bhagavan, we're talking about the inside of your own house here. Who am I to give you instructions on how to navigate the inside of your own house? So that's one strand of my history, that I started doing it in a rather hesitant way, not sure if I was doing it right, but I found that by having faith that Bhagavan knew what he was talking about, that Bhagavan wasn't someone who was going to give me wrong advice, that he was someone who had successfully practiced inquiry, realized the self, and who was in a position to give good advice, I genuinely felt that if I read his words carefully and then tried to do inquiry exactly according to Bhagavan's words, not invent my own technique, not have my own variation on it, but simply to have faith in those words and carry out those words as Bhagavan gave them, then in a way I would have Bhagavan's grace, and that grace would produce the best results. Now, I think probably the clearest and the most simple set of instructions you can find on self-inquiry comes from Bhagavan's essay version of Who Am I?, where he says, in order to make the mind subside, ask yourself, who am I, each time you recollect that your mind has strayed to an object. So who is the person who is seeing the object? Who is the person who is thinking a thought or remembering a memory? And then he said the obvious answer to who has this thought is to me. He said, then ask yourself, who am I? Who is this I who is thinking this thought, perceiving this perception? And then he said, the I which had that thought will start to sink back into its source. So he said that's the beginning, the middle and the end of inquiry. It's very, very simple. It's a one-step process. You look at what the mind is dwelling on and you say, that's an object, that's not myself, that's not the I, it's something the I is thinking about. So you say to yourself, well, who or what is this thing inside me that's perceiving or thinking? Now, in all the books, it's called I. Now, I've stopped telling people to hold on to the I because holding on to the I, people make it into some kind of object. They go looking for this thing called I, and they fixate on it, and then they end up in this kind of dualistic, absorbed, concentrated relationship with one corner of their brain fixating on this idea called I. So when I talk to people about inquiry, I say, what is it inside yourself that thinks your thoughts? What is that entity inside yourself that perceives your perceptions? Don't give it a name. Don't call it I and go looking for it. Just try to focus attention on that which within yourself is the thinker of your thoughts, the remember of your memories, the perceiver of your perceptions. Don't call it I. Just try to be that entity, be in that place from which all associations arise. Hold on to that, watch it, and see where it takes you. So this is where I have ended up in my own inquiry. There is something in me which coordinates my thoughts, which coordinates my perceptions, which takes my decisions. It's called I in general parlance, but I don't like to give it a name. It's a very nameless, formless state of being. It's a state of awareness. There's something inside there that has this continuous tendency to extrovert itself and put attention on things that are not itself. All I try to do is to hold on to that inner sense of what is it in me that perceives, what is it in me that thinks, what is it in me that remembers, and hold on to that to the exclusion of all thoughts. And if it's a good day, if my mind's in a good state, then it subsides and goes back and mind is silent. It's something that I think for the vast majority of people is an endless, decades-long process. It's not something that gives quick results. I had blissful, happy, peaceful states when I did this 40 years ago. I still have peaceful, happy, blissful states when I do it today. But as often as not, you can sit down and try and do this, and it feels like day one that you've never meditated before in your life. There's something about the alternating qualities of the mind, the gunas, that you can have a good day, you can have a brilliant day, you can feel incredibly silent, peaceful, happy, relaxed, blissful, but then the next day you're all over the place. The alternating qualities of the mind mean that it's not going to be linear progress, that you have to enjoy the good days when they're there, not worry too much about the bad days on the bad days, but be vigilant, be persistent, and don't give up. This is the advice I give to everybody. Don't stop because it's not working. Continue because it's not working, because that's the only way you're going to succeed.
So after so many years, do you have more success in keeping the mind closer to the high?
Let's say I start to play the piano and I practice every day for 6 hours. There's no way that after 2 years I can't do my scales. It's like there's something that you just get so good at it, you never go back to where you were. But doing inquiry, there's days when it really does feel like day one all over again. That the mind has these alternations. In Hinduism they call them the gunas. Like you have these massive fluctuations. And when you have a pure guna, when your mind is in a ready state to do inquiry properly, it can happen very quickly, very easily, and you can sit there and there's like an moment. And you know that
I is dissolving, there's just a feeling of peace, joy, being, stillness. Other days you can metaphorically bang your head against the wall all day and it doesn't make any difference. There's a kind of stodginess in the head that you just can't move through any amount of effort. And devotees also mention this to Bhagavan, like Kanji Swami, for example, was his attendant for 12 years in the 1920s, early 30s. And his solution, he said, there are just some days when the mind refuses to cooperate. It's the nature of the mind. It doesn't want to be constantly made to do something which is not natural for it to do. And sometimes there's so much resistance, no amount of effort or determination is going to succeed. So he said, then I go pradakshina, or I read spiritual books, or I do japa. And he told this to Bhagavan. He said, yes, you can't do it all the time, the mind won't let you, but it's also, don't give up and say, well, I'll go and watch my movie or read my novel, I'll try later. Pick something else which is to some extent training or conditioning the mind not to be busy or not to go outwards in worldly activities. So he said with approval to Kanji Swami, if you can't do it, then you pick some other technique, but just don't let your mind wander all over the place.
People that are new to this path may be interested, what does it help me? What benefits would come with self-inquiry if I really go into this?
Bhagavan always insisted that inquiry was for the dissolution of the sense of the individual self, but he did also admit that if you took up the practice, good things would happen to you. You'd get peaceful, you'd get quiet. He even said it was the best medicine. He said if you did self-inquiry regularly, it was a good way of keeping the body healthy. Now, Arthur Osborne, I wish I could remember where I'd read this, he had this wonderful line that said, self-inquiry is a win-win practice. Either you get enlightened or you just get peaceful and happy. Now, there's no downside to self-inquiry. If you follow a yogic path, if you try and do Kundalini yoga, then you might end up, if you have that kind of predisposition, getting into various psychotic states. There are practices which are somewhat dangerous. I haven't ever come across a single person who has started doing self-inquiry who has ever suffered from any adverse effects whatsoever. Those who have pursued it all say that although it's hard work, it's boring at times, it's improved their mental stability, it's increased the amount of time that they spend in peaceful, happy states. What else do you want from life? You can be very extreme, you can strive for liberation, or you can simply do it to keep your mind clean and tidy and live a happy, peaceful, well-adjusted life with your family and doing your job. Just about everybody asks, how can I tell if I'm making progress? Now, Bhagavan was asked this question once, and he said, the extent to which your mind is free from unwanted thoughts, that's a good measure of your progress. I think that's a really good thing that anyone can keep tabs on in their own head. How much do I daydream? How much is my mind under control? To what extent have I stopped my mind from jumping out and attaching itself to other things? And how long can I keep it dwelling in this inner sense of being? That when one starts doing inquiry, or in fact any spiritual practice, there's an immediate buzz of some kind. You get some bliss, you get some peace, you get some happiness. There's a kind of honeymoon period when everything goes very, very well, and you think that's great, another month and I'll be enlightened. But unfortunately that's not the way it works. Those initial experiences wear off, and what you're left with often is a mind that appears to be even more busy than the one that you started with. There's something about inquiry that opens a trapdoor to your unconscious, subconscious, and all kinds of things start pouring out. So how busy your mind is doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it well or not, or doing it badly. You can tell if you're doing it well by how often you recollect that your attention has strayed from the inner sense of I to the objects that the mind has strayed to. If on a moment-to-moment basis you have some recollection that your mind is busy, and each time you recollect it's busy, you take it back to the I who's perceived the busyness, then you're doing it well, then you're doing it properly. Talking about the Buddha saying that one should not take anything on trust, not take anything as a belief, but one should find out for oneself what is true and what is not true, and one should reject what is not true and hold on to truth. Now that is the essence of what Bhagavan had to say, and it's also it's the core of what he taught about self-inquiry. Now, first of all, I want to say that if people don't know a lot about Ramana Maharshi, what they do know is that he taught self-inquiry. So they tend to conflate the two and say Ramana Maharshi taught self-inquiry and not really go into the nuances of all the other things that were going on, all the other things that he suggested, recommended. So I would like to first start by saying that Bhagavan himself did not set great store by verbal instructions. So he said that my highest teachings are the silent emanations that come off me. If you sit quietly in front of me, if you quieten your own mind and just sit in my presence or the presence of anyone else who is in this state, there's a kind of infectious quality to the state of enlightenment, and you make yourself receptive and open to it by being quiet yourself. It's a bit like having a radio receiver that's tuned to the right frequency. The right frequency to receive the emanation of a jnani is inner quiet, inner silence. If you can turn your own dial to that particular setting, then you find out what the state of that jnani is without any intermediary instructions or practice. Somehow, by a kind of osmosis, you absorb the emanations of his state, and that state becomes your own. So for him, that was the highest teachings he had. Bhagavan himself, when he was asked to make a hierarchy of his teachings, he always said that silence is my principal teachings. And by that he meant that when he abided in the self, in that state he created an energy field, and if you sat in that energy field, you could somehow be infected by those emanations of silence, you could tune into those emanations, and if your mind was sufficiently quiet and subtle, then you yourself could experience the self by being in the presence of Bhagavan. He said this is a direct, unmediated teaching. It doesn't require any activity on the part of the recipient. All it needs is a quiet mind and to sit in the presence of someone who has realized the self. Now, some people might object and say that, well, Bhagavan is no longer here, so that particular option is no longer possible. But I would say that it's eminently available. The self is everyone's true nature. It's what we really are. Bhagavan once said his favorite #1 verse from the Bhagavad Gita was, I am the self, O Gudaseka, abiding in the heart of all beings. I am the beginning, the middle, and likewise the end of all that exists. Bhagavan is not the person who sat on the sofa for 50 years. Bhagavan is the self shining in your own heart. If you want to contact that self, all you have to do is look in the right direction. There is a very nice verse in Padamalai, one of Muruganu's collections of Bhagavan's teachings, and Bhagavan himself said, why are you complaining that I'm not looking at you? Your problem is you're not looking in the right direction. If you look at me in the heart, you will discover that I am looking at you all the time, continuously. So although there is no longer a Bhagavan on a sofa on whom one can focus and get this satsang, there is a Bhagavan residing in the heart, and all it needs to attain that satsang is to point one's attention 180 degrees away from where it is now towards the heart to see Bhagavan looking back at you. So #1, the teaching is silence. It's not to think about anything, not to do anything, not to want anything, but simply to abide in that inner silence, in that inner presence, and point attention, so long as it can be pointed in a direction, inwards, towards the Bhagavan who resides there all the time. That's level 1. Then if you went to Bhagavan and said, Bhagavan, who am I? What is the truth? What is the highest truth? He wouldn't say, do self-inquiry or anything else. He would say, you yourself are the self. You yourself are consciousness. You yourself are Brahman. Now this is not simply a piece of information that he's giving you to file away with all the other bits of information in your brain. When a jnani tells you, you are the self, you are consciousness, there's a power in those words, and if you listen to those words in your heart, not in your brain, not in your mind, then those words are charged, and by simply accepting those words in silence, you yourself have the possibility of becoming the truth of those words. You experience the truth of those words simply by hearing them in the right place, by letting them settle in the right place. So, number one, Bhagavan said, sit with me, sit in the presence of the self, be absorbed in the self and experience it. Number two, if that's not working for you, you can ask a question, you can say, who am I, what is my true nature, how do I discover it? And Bhagavan would say, why are you looking for something that you already are? You yourself are consciousness, you yourself are the self. People would then say, yes, yes, but what do I do? That's not the correct response. When Bhagavan says, you are Brahmin, you are consciousness, you should respect the Guru's words. The Guru is telling you a very important truth about your true nature. He's not asking you to do something, he's not asking you to go to a cave and meditate. He is telling you from his own experience what the truth of your own real nature is. And if you can accept those words, if you can take delivery of them in the right place, then you yourself become the Brahman that Bhagavan has just declared that you are. Now, regrettably, that is not going to happen with the vast majority of people. Most people could sit with Bhagavan and feel his power, his presence, his silence. Not many people could take delivery of the words, you are self, you are Brahmin, and actually experience those words for themselves. A very few, fortunate few could, but for most people, they have to go to the next level. They go to Bhagavan and they say, okay, I've taken that statement, it's not doing anything for me. How do I get enlightened? What's the quickest, the most direct way of getting enlightened? And that's when we come down to the practice of self-inquiry. So on Bhagavan's own hierarchy, although he said self-inquiry was the most direct path if you wanted a practice, on his own hierarchy he said that abiding in the self, as the self, in the Guru's presence, whether through an external form or internally, is the highest practice. If not, listen very carefully to the Guru's words as he tells you about your true nature. Take delivery of those words in the right place and you will experience the truth of those words. And if that isn't working, then you have to take up a practice. And that practice is self-inquiry.
Bhagavan is famous for giving the question, who am I? Why did he do so?
When Bhagavan asked people to say, who am I, to find out the nature of the I, he wasn't giving some abstract intellectual advice. He was passing on the method by which he himself had realized the self at the age of 16. As he was lying on the floor in Madurai, the question arose in him, who is the one that sees? Meaning, who is this thing inside me that sees something outside? And he says, as a direct answer to that question, his individual I went back into the heart and died, and revealed a state in which there was no longer any distinction between the one who saw things and the objects that were seen. So when he said, ask yourself, who am I? He was saying, this is how I got enlightened, try it yourself, and maybe the same thing will happen to you. Now, as a secondary point on this, Bhagavan would occasionally be asked, why does this particular method work, and why is it better than other methods? And for that we need to explain a little Bhagavan's teachings on the nature of the I, how people have wrong identifications and how those identifications can be erased. So he said the idea that we are an individual person, an I inside a body, is a defective programming, a kind of wrong conditioning that we all suffer from. He said that there is an I inside the body which thinks itself separate from everything outside. There's a world outside, there are people outside, and those are the objects that we perceive through our senses, and those are the things that we think about through our mind. So for example, when I say I see a tree, I is the subject I, tree is the object I look at. When I say I feel happy, I is subject I, happiness is the object state that I'm absorbed in. He said this dichotomy between a subject who thinks and perceives and an object that is seen or perceived is the root cause of individuation, that the idea that we are a separate self arises simply because of this confused notion that we are a person occupying a body who sees things that are separate from us and thinks about things which are different from us. And he said this particular illusion, this particular wrong idea, can be challenged by putting attention onto the I, which thinks thoughts, which remembers memories, which sees objects. He said that this individual I comes into existence and only continues to exist as long as it identifies with things it thinks about and things that it sees. He said there's a continuous process of reinforcement, that I am a person, the idea I am a person arises and continues because of all the objects that the individual I thinks it is or identifies with or associates with. And he said you need to challenge this idea, I am a person, I am a woman, I am a man, I am angry. He said the common thread to all those is the I who thinks, the I who perceives, the I who feels. And what he's saying is that if you can put full attention on this inner sense of I and vigilantly hold focus on that inner sense in such a way that the I is not jumping out to identify or associate with other objects, then that individual I can no longer exist. He said it's always in association with something. It's a thought, it's a memory, it's a perception, and that when you can sever the links between the I who thinks, the I who perceives, and those things it thinks about or perceives, it can no longer survive by itself in isolation. At that point, he said it will slowly start to subside back where it came from, which is the heart, which is the self. So he said initially there will be feelings of peace, silence, quietness, as this I starts to sink back, but this I is conditioned, it's programmed to extrovert all the time. So the moment the I starts to think, immediately a whole bunch of other things will jump up and try and grab hold of it. Bhagavan said self-inquiry is to hold on to this sense of I to the exclusion of all other thoughts, to the point where the mind is no longer interested in extroverting onto other objects, other thoughts. At that moment it starts to subside, it goes back into the heart, at which point you realize that the true I is not the I that thinks I am the body, I am this thing that sees things outside me. You discover the true I inside yourself, which is the universal I, which makes no distinction between what's inside and what's outside. So then Bhagavan would quite often, instead of giving them a practice, he would say, you are already enlightened. Now, people would say, yes, I know that, but what do I do? It slides off most people. But if you go through all the recordings of what Bhagavan had to say that have been recorded, you won't find that instructions on inquiry or anything else are the single largest topic. The thing he said most often, in various shapes and forms, was, you are the self, you are consciousness, you are Brahman, you are already free, etc., etc. So although sitting in the presence of a jnani and being quiet was what Bhagavan considered to be being open to his highest teachings, he himself knew that most people couldn't be on that wavelength. Most people didn't have the maturity, the receptivity to take advantage of that. He would try for a time, he might say, but you're already enlightened, you're already the self, you're already Brahman. But I think he knew that most people were not going to take delivery of that statement in a place where it became their experience. When a guru tells you the truth about yourself, it's a piece of information. It doesn't resonate with you, it doesn't stimulate that experience in yourself, except in very rare cases. So then, the next level down is practicalities. I'm not getting the experience by sitting here quietly. I'm not getting the experience because you've told me I am the self. I want to do something to realize the self. What should I do? So now we're at the level of concrete, practical advice. So the first thing to appreciate about Bhagavan is that he was absolutely non-prescriptive. Ramanashram was never a kind of spiritual boot camp where you came in, you had 5 o'clock meditation session, someone told you how to sit, where to sit, what to practice. If you came to Ramanashram, you sat with him in his presence. If you wanted to speak, you could speak. If you wanted to just sit and be quiet, you sat and be quiet. If you had a doubt or a problem, you could go up to him and you could say, Bhagavan, give me some advice, or Bhagavan, help me, or what practice should I do? And even with promptings like this, Bhagavan would not directly say, do self-inquiry. He might say, well, what are you doing now? And you might say, oh, I'm repeating Krishna's name, or I'm worshipping this particular image. And although he is on the record as saying that self-inquiry is the most direct way to get enlightened, even then he wouldn't tell you to do it. He would say, very good, carry on. If you had a practice that you were happy with, if you were content continuing with it, then he would say, very good, carry on. But if you came to him and said, for example, what's the quickest way to get enlightened? Almost invariably he would say self-inquiry. And if you came to him and said, I'm not happy with my japa or my pujas or whatever, do you think I should do something else? Then he might push you gently in the direction of self-inquiry. He did say on innumerable occasions that there are only 2 effective methods to get enlightened. One is to do self-inquiry, and the other is complete unconditional surrender to Guru or God. If you came to Bhagavan and you wanted advice, you could go to Bhagavan and say, Bhagavan, I want to get enlightened. What is the quickest and most direct method? If you asked that particular question, almost invariably he would say self-inquiry or surrender to God. So that's a question for which there's only one possible answer, but that doesn't mean he's prescribing it for you. If you went to Bhagavan and said, Bhagavan, what's a good practice? What should I do? If it was more general, more diffuse, then Bhagavan might say, well, what are you doing right now? And if you said, I'm doing Hare Krishna Japa, or if you said, I'm doing puja to the murti in my puja room, he wouldn't look down on you, he wouldn't regard that as a second-rate practice, he would say, very good, carry on. He himself was not a missionary, he wasn't proactive, he never ever told people they had to change their way of life, their spiritual practice. He did, in a theoretical way, admit that self-inquiry was the most direct path, but he never imposed that particular view on other people, he never asked anyone to do it. He was quite content for you to follow whatever practice you were already doing, but if at any point you expressed some dissatisfaction with what you were doing, or you said, Bhagavan, I think I'd like to try inquiry, then he would say, very good, carry on. Now this is an aspect of Bhagavan that appears across the board. He didn't like people to come to him for a decision. What he liked was for you to make your own decision and then present your decision to him for his approval. Although Bhagavan said that self-inquiry was the most effective way to eliminate the sense of individuality, he never ever said that mind by itself could cause the dissolution of mind. He said that there is a power inside oneself that has to be activated, that ultimately is the cause of the destruction of the individual I, but that it cannot do its work unless the I subsides and falls within the, shall we call it, the radius of power of that inner self. He said that by making the effort to make the I subside through the practice of self-inquiry, the I starts to sink into the heart. To hold the attenuated I in the heart continuously is the most that the devotee can do by himself. That in itself is a very difficult feat, but that's the limit of the devotee's effort. What Bhagavan says is that once you start moving towards the self, the power of the self reaches out to you, and ultimately, if your mind is no longer interested in extroverting, if there are no longer any inner tendencies that make the mind jump out, then the power of the self will consume the individual I, pull it into itself, and definitively destroy it. Bhagavan said that the self is always waiting inside you for you to turn and approach it. He said that the power of the self is infinitely stronger than your own efforts, but the power of that self is not going to do its work unless you turn towards it and start moving in its direction. He occasionally quoted a verse from, I think, Bhagavatam. He said, if you take one step towards God, God responds by taking 10 steps towards you. But God isn't going to move a muscle until you about face, turn 180 degrees and take that first step towards him, at which point the power of the self, acting through the guru, takes hold of the I, pulls it into itself and dissolves it. If people chose the path of self-inquiry, which a lot of them did, and they came to him for advice, then we get to this point, what is self-inquiry, how is it done, how does it work, why doesn't it work sometimes, and what makes a successful practice. I want to explain first how Bhagavan saw the mind and how he thought it should be eliminated, because that's what self-inquiry really is. He said that all of your thoughts, all of your perceptions, all of your memories, all of your ideas, they're all an outgrowth or a predicate on one primal thought, which he called the I thought. This I is the equivalent of a string in a necklace. It's the thread that runs through every single idea, thought, perception that you have. And he said this I is the subject, it's yourself. Everything that the I thinks or perceives is an object. So I see a tree, I is the subject, the tree is an object. I feel angry, I is the subject, the emotion, anger is the object. He said that your attention is continually on the objects that you, the subject, I, are seeing, feeling and perceiving. And he said because your attention is always on objects rather than subjects, you never become aware of the true nature of what this subject is. And very interestingly, he said this subject I that you never look at is in fact a fiction. It's a false association. It arises from an idea that I am a person, I have a mind, I live inside a particular body, I do things, I remember things. He said that idea is absolutely wrong, and he said it's what causes you suffering, it's what makes you have wrong ideas about yourself, about the world. And he said every single wrong idea you have about yourself, about the world, about God, stems from this idea that you are a person inhabiting a body and having a mind. And he said this sense of personal identity, which he called the I thought, needs to be challenged. And it needs to be challenged repeatedly, regularly, on a moment-to-moment basis. So he said, because your attention is always on things that are not the I, the objects of your attention, the objects that you remember, believe, perceive, you never look at yourself to see what it is that is thinking your thoughts and perceiving your perceptions. He said that's where your focus needs to be. You're not looking at things that you want to study, things that you want to know. You're actually looking at the entity within you which thinks your thoughts and which perceives your perceptions. He said, what is this thing inside you that is aware of your thoughts? What is this thing inside you that claims it's perceiving objects outside of yourself? He said it's not something that ever comes under scrutiny, because we're all obsessed with a continuous flow of objects, remembered objects, perceived objects, the thought objects. He said what we need to do to find out the nature of this sense of individual identity is to be continuously aware of this one inner entity, this one inner thing that associates and identifies with all the things that it thinks and perceives. He called it the I thought, but I prefer, I is a bit of a loaded word, because if you tell people to start looking for their I or start focusing on their I, then they create another object. They think, oh, my I is up here or it's down here, and then they start focusing on an idea called the I. What I would suggest to people they do is look at themselves and be continuously aware. What is it inside yourself that thinks your thoughts when you have a thought? What is it inside yourself that perceives a perception when you see something? That is your I. That is your sense of individual identity. Now, this isn't simply a question of looking at something and understanding what it is, because what Bhagavan says is this thing that correlates, organizes all your thoughts, all your perceptions, isn't actually a real entity. continues to apparently be there because it's never looked at properly. He said if you can hold on to this sense of I, this thing that thinks your thoughts, and not be distracted by any passing thought object, this I will very, very slowly start to subside. And he said if you can keep attention on this inner feeling, this thing that thinks my thoughts, without allowing it to escape and think any more thoughts, he says it will go back to its source and ultimately it will disappear, and that disappearance will reveal to you who you really are. So what he's saying in effect is that there is a false entity, something that has taken control of your life, which you call I, myself, my mind, which organizes and correlates all the perceptions, the feelings, the emotions, the thoughts, the beliefs. If you can cut that I off from all those things, hold on incessantly onto this inner awareness, the I that has these perceptions, that I starts to sink and finally it will disappear. The analogy I like the best is, Bhagavan said in one of his dialogues, he said, imagine it's the shirt of a man and his dog picks up the scent of that shirt. The dog can put its nose on the ground and follow that scent back to the original owner of that shirt. So this really is what the I thought is all about. The I thought is, it's not the real self, it's not who you really are, but by absolutely focusing intently on that thing which in you, which has all these thoughts, you've picked up its scent and you're following it back to its source. And if you keep your metaphorical nose to this I thought and follow it back to its source, it goes back to the self, it goes back to the heart, and it disappears. The immersion in that subjective feeling of I as it goes back to its source and disappears, that's inquiry. This came up. People would come to Bhagavan and they would ask a question and he would say, who's asking that question? So it wasn't an evasive reply. He said the answer to most spiritual, most philosophical questions is a knowledge and an understanding of the I which is asking the question. So instead of giving an answer which would satisfy an I which he didn't believe was real or true or had any importance, he would tell people who is asking that question, find out the I who has asked me that particular question. I'm not going to give you an answer. If you want to find the answer, you have to get the experience of having that I disappear and see what remains. That's the answer to your question. So this was kind of a bit frustrating for a lot of people. They would come with all kinds of fancy philosophical theories, ideas. They'd try and argue with him. And he'd just keep coming back again and again. Who or what is this I which is asking me this question? You're talking about the content of the mind. I'm talking about the origin of the mind. I'm talking about that which causes the mind to have thoughts, to think thoughts. Go back to the thinker of the thoughts, find out where it arises from, and you'll get an answer to the question. He would say that when a thought arises in your mind, ask yourself, to whom does this thought occur? This is a way of transferring attention from the object that you're thinking about to the person, the subject who's having the thought. So you have the thought, you have the perception, you say, who has this thought, who has this perception? I do. So then you're already a little bit aware of the I which is having the thought. And then Bhagavan said, ask yourself, who am I? Who is this I who just had this thought, just had this perception? And he said, that's really all there is to it. He said, whenever your mind is distracted by objects that you're thinking about, take your attention back to the subject who had the thought and either try to see where it comes from or aggressively question it. Inquire into its nature, inquire into its origin by focusing intently on this sense of I and asking who am I, and see where that leads you. It's not rocket science. It's a simple one-step process. He said every time your mind is on something else other than the I, take it back to this I, be aware of that I, intently, vigilantly be aware of that subjective feeling of I inside yourself. If you get distracted, just gently reject the distraction, go back to the sense of I, hold on to it, grip it tightly, and if you hold on strongly enough and don't get distracted, it subsides and disappears. He said that's all there is to it, but you have to be vigilant, you have to be attentive, and for most people it's hard work and it goes on for a long time. There are two ways you can look at this. Bhagavan said you can either ask yourself, who am I? Or you can simply be aware of this I thought, hold on to it intently and watch it disappear. Sometimes he would tell people, just ask yourself, who am I? Find out what is this I and where it comes from. And at other times he would just say, hold on to the I thought. If you check through all the literature, I would guess, well, I know actually because I have checked, I would say that ask him giving advice saying, ask yourself, who am I? Those replies slightly exceed the number of times he said, hold on to the I thought. But I think the reason that this happens is that most of the people who are asking him are people who've never done inquiry before. They're coming to him asking for advice on a new technique. So I think he would start them off by getting them to transfer attention by saying, who am I, who am I? But I think most people who do this practice, once they've started it, taken it up as a regular routine, they find this whole business of saying, to whom does this thought occur, to me, who am I, as a kind of little bit of circumlocution, a bit of a distraction, and they just spontaneously, very quickly, they move attention off the object which is distracting them and back to the subject which is the perceiver or think of the distraction. There is one aspect of this which personally I think is important, although I would say that attention to the I ultimately is the goal that everyone should aim for, and that if you're really quiet, really peaceful, disturbing yourself to ask who am I lots and lots of times may not be the best advice. I would say that the fact that Bhagavan has told you to ask yourself who am I, quite clearly not only in the seminal text who am I, but in many of his answers, means that you should, or if you follow his advice with faith, with conviction, then you've got the wind behind you. You've got Bhagavan's power, Bhagavan's grace, helping you to find the source of this I. He's told you to do this. If you follow his advice to the letter, with absolute faith and conviction that he knows what he's talking about, that he knows what's best for you, and if I follow this particular piece of advice to the letter, I will get results, then that's going to work for you as well. It's a matter of having this conviction. My guru has told me this via a book or in person. I will follow these instructions to the letter, and by doing so I invoke his grace because I'm following exactly what he asked me to do. That's one attitude. Also, I would say equally valid is him saying, intently hold on to this I thought. Be aware of it at all times. Don't allow your mind to stray anywhere else. Keep it completely absorbed in the sense of I. If you do that, then this I has to vanish. It can't stand constant scrutiny. So I would like to qualify or expand on what I just said a little bit. Although Bhagavan said that you should, in every possible moment, be aware of what the mind is being distracted by and take it back to its source thought I, at no time did he suggest that doing self-inquiry was a traditional sitting meditation practice that you did at fixed hours. At no time did he ever give permission for any of his devotees to give up any worldly obligation that they had. He said this is something that you fit in at all times of the day, whenever your mind is not required for your work or your family. He didn't think it necessary to go to a cave, go to a monastery. He said if you go to a remote place, you can't leave your mind behind, you have to take your mind with you. He said what needs to be given up is not your circumstances, but your mind and the idea that I am a particular person in particular circumstances. He said that is your obstacle, and moving your body from one place to another isn't going to solve that problem.
Maybe we should work out what makes self-inquiry so special by putting the focus on the subject rather than the object.
Very good. This is a very important distinction in Bhagavan's teachings. He said that the reason why self-inquiry works and that other techniques don't is that other techniques allow the I to rise and get hold of an object of contemplation. So if you are chanting somebody's name or worshipping a statue, I, the subject, is fixated or concentrated on a name or some holy image of some sort. So he said there's a distinction between what he called meditation, which is an existing, established, risen I, attaching itself to and associating with an object of contemplation. So he said that is never going to get rid of the I. He said the only way to make the I subside is to take away all of the associations it has with objects, including holy objects. So this gets back to the core question of why does inquiry work, and why, according to Bhagavan, do other techniques not work when it comes to realizing the self. He said for the self to be realized, the I has to subside into the heart and be consumed by the self, and the I will not subside so long as it's focusing on any kind of object, even a holy object. So he said that you can meditate, you can worship an image of God, you can do japa, you can fill yourself with love for the divine, but throughout that there's an experiencer. There's someone who has the experience, and that experiencer might be having a wonderful, blissful, happy experience, but it's still an experience of something. And that experiencer isn't going to subside until it gives up all the associations it has with outside objects, including all objects associated with God. So this is a rather fundamentalist view of religious practice. Bhagavan says in one of his Aladu Narpadu verses that devotion to form enables you to see God in a particular form and no more. If you want to get the true experience, the one who is devoted to the form has to subside into the self and disappear. So he said devotion to form can wear away your I thought, your sense of individuality, but it's never really going to produce the final result of extinction of the I, because that risen I is always holding on to a form which gives some kind of bliss, some kind of happiness, and so long as that bliss and happiness is there, there's an extreme reluctance and unwillingness to take that I back to the self. It in a sense becomes addicted to name and form, it becomes addicted to a form of worship, and it's not too extreme to say that that makes the I survive, and in some cases makes it even stronger. What Bhagavan is saying is that you must eliminate the experiencer who has the good experiences of God. You must take the experiencer back into the self and have it be extinguished there by the power of the self. So this is why there's this absolute dichotomy in Bhagavan's teachings between inquiry, which makes the I go back, and all other practices which use an extroverted I to latch onto objects.
Bhagavan was telling this story about the yogi who could enter nirvikalpa samadhi, which is the highest inner state, so to speak, and come out as the same old guy, so to speak. And the instruction he gave several times is that we should rouse the mind out of this pleasant silence and start actively pursuing the question about ourselves. In that regard, it might be interesting to talk about the instruction Osborne gave with the heart center, concentrating on the heart center. What would you like to say about that?
This is very true. There are spiritual experiences that will give you incredible bliss, incredible ecstasy, even as you say, nirvikalpa samadhi. But Bhagavan went against the mainstream on this and said that nirvikalpa samadhi was not the final goal, that in nirvikalpa samadhi, even though it was incredibly blissful, there was still a latent, undestroyed I which would remanifest itself once the bliss had run its course. So he was always recommending that you get hold of the experiencer and ignore the experience. He said whatever good experiences come, ignore them because they're temporary. He said what comes and goes is not reality. Reality is that which never changes, which is pure being and which doesn't come and go. That was his definition of reality. He said whatever is temporary, whatever comes and goes, however nice it is, disregard it, find out who is the experiencer of it, take that experiencer back to the source And when that experiencer is extinguished, then you discover what true reality is. Now this advice to ignore pleasant experiences is, as you say, something that can be associated with the practice of focusing on the heart center. I do know people who have done this experience. I can think of several people who told me that they imagined Bhagavan residing in this heart center on the right side of the chest. I know other people who've done this practice, and they all tell me that they had incredibly strong, blissful experiences, and they validate the practice by the extent of the bliss which they experience by contemplating on some chosen image in the right side of the chest. Now, Bhagavan did say that if you want to concentrate on a particular place in the body, this was better than any other, but at no time did he ever associate concentrating on the heart center with the practice of self-inquiry. And if you want to understand why, we have to go back to this whole theoretical underpinning of inquiry, which is that the subject I has to sever itself from objects of perception. If I am aware of an I in myself, and I imagine that the source of my I is the right side of the chest, then I create an object in myself to look at and concentrate on. So there's this very strong dualistic experience of a subject I looking at a place in the body and experiencing a blissful experience as a result of concentrating on a state or an image on the right side of the chest. What Bhagavan says repeatedly is that the I is not going to subside by any other method other than isolating it from the object it habitually identifies with. So if you pick an image and locate it inside this heart center on the right side of your chest, and you get a very, very blissful experience, you're heading in the wrong direction. You're in the realm of objectivization, you're in the realm of indulging in experiences, you're not holding on to the I, you're just indulging in a very pleasant, very blissful experience. Now Bhagavan made several comments about the heart center. He said that from the point of view of the body, it's the place in the body where individuation occurs, it's where the I thought rises, goes to the brain, and then separates out into the seer and the seen. But because Bhagavan said this, and because he said find the source of the I, a lot of people think they prejudge the final destination of the I and think when Bhagavan asks me to find out what is the source of the I, if I put my attention on this place in the body where Bhagavan says it rises from, then I'm going to make it go back there and disappear. This isn't what happens at all. You just put your attention on a physical location and have a very blissful, peaceful experience in which there's a very strong subject I focusing on a blissful experience as an object. If you really want to experience what goes on in the heart, you have to take the individual I off the objects it looks at and experiences, and that includes focusing on the heart center, allow it to subsist by itself, and then very naturally it will subside back into that heart center and disappear. You don't accomplish this by looking at the heart, you accomplish it by severing the I from all the things it wants to look at and experience. You have to take the I back to its source and get that experience which only arises when that I thought has sunk into the heart center. You don't get it by staring at a place in the body, you get it by allowing the I to disappear in the heart, and then you get that full current, the full experience. So many people came who had very active family lives, they had to support their family, and in all of these cases he would just say, whatever spare time you have, put your mind on this sense of I. Watch it, be aware of it, see where it comes from, see how it manifests. And he said that if you don't waste all the spare moments of your day, if you're walking around the house, if you're going to work, if you're eating your food, you're not constantly being bugged by your children or your boss. In every person's life, there's several hours a day when it's you time. It might not be you in front of the TV, but no one is demanding your intellect or your attention or your time for anything. You are free with the contents of your mind for hours and hours of every day, no matter how busy you are. He said, in those moments,
Be aware of the I, be aware of how it attaches itself to thoughts, how it goes out. Watch this process, go back to this originating I that's the cause and source of all these thoughts, and just hold on to that I. Now he said, in the busiest life, the most chaotic life, if you can use your spare time to go back to the source, hold on to the I, then he says you will create a current of awareness, a current of silence, a current of peace. And in those hours of the day when you have to do your job, when you have to look after your kids, he said that prevailing background current will be there because you've established it in those spare moments when your attention wasn't required for family and job. So he never said it's something you do at fixed times. He never said you have to give up your job to do it. He said destiny will give you a particular script. Don't skimp on that script. Whatever duties you've been given, fulfill them to the best of your ability. But in every spare second you have, be aware of that I, hold on to that I, and in all the other times of your day when you're busy, you'll feel a peace, quiet background current that's a result of channeling all your spare time, all your energy into a search for the I.
My name is Reinhard Jung, and Henry asked me to talk about my path, how I came here, and about self-inquiry. I had a crisis when I was 18, and a girlfriend sent me a book, and this book had a photo of Bhagavan and, of course, his teachings. In those days I didn't understand the teachings very much, but this photo showed me something which was true. I cannot explain much better. This has never left me, this confidence that he is the truth. After that I was trained as a TM teacher and had a retreat for 6 months, and this experience of deep silence made it much more clear what I was looking for. But even then I wanted to practice self-inquiry and started to study this in different traditions like Buddhism. I found a graded approach using the body, the senses, and slowly, by and by, I got a better understanding. So I became a doctor, I taught other people. I also was teaching this meditation of relaxing into your body as a step towards self-inquiry.
Reinhard, suppose I am a neophyte in the process of self-inquiry, and I come to see you as someone who could introduce me and teach me the technique of self-inquiry. How would you go about doing this?
Now let us just start and dive into it if you're ready. We close our eyes. Wherever you find some unnatural tension, let go. Be very easy and natural. Because a lot of our mind is connected with the body. Usually we are lost in thought, as we say, and don't notice the body if it doesn't hurt. So just to feel the body, really reside in the body, is already a great thing to do. You can be aware of your feet on the ground. Just feel this touch. It is there for your noticing. And observe your breath without any interfering. You neither push the breath, nor you hamper it. You just let it flow as it wants to. And move with this flow. Breath is such a beautiful thing. Such a soft and delicate movement. So your whole mind can be in the body, be aware of this lively tissue, and more the body will relax and get quiet and harmonious. It's like falling asleep. with the difference that we are awake. We see what is going on. So you can notice your body gets calmer and calmer by and by, very naturally. You just stay close to the harmony and the calm. You can really sink into this simple feeling. And this is already a part of the question of who you are. You did not ask this intellectually. This is already a question, a form of the question, who you are. Maybe you can find out, if you look into your whole bodies and feel the sensations, there may be a part in it where the calm, where the silence is most prominent. Just take some time and feel yourself into this. Now very gently become aware of this fact that you are watching your body. You can realize that your body is an object in your perception. So this effortless watching is the key. So just observe this subtle feeling of calm in your heart and let the breath flow easily and naturally. This can continue for some time and then come back to the whole body. Just feel your whole body from the top of your head down to the floor and realize its oneness. Now very gently become aware of this fact that you are watching your body. You can realize that your body is an object in your perception. So usually we don't differentiate, but you are aware of an object called body. Just stay with this understanding, an understanding that I'm not identical with the body. I don't know by now what I am. The difference now is that the body has become a very calm and homogeneous experience for you through this relaxation. So that makes it much easier for the mind to stay in this observing mode. You are merely watching. You don't have to achieve anything. You don't have to do anything, avoid anything. You just be. One of the greatest instructions of Ramana Maharshi was in Tamil, Summa Iru. Summa means still, Iru, be. Be still. So that is what you are now. You are much quieter. There may be thoughts coming and going. Stillness is a lively thing, but you can realize these two poles in your perception. Now stay in this simple, present calmness. Be interested. What is it that observes the body? And slowly the interest shifts from the body towards yourself. You rest in this understanding, in this realization that you are observing the body. But accept the fact that all you can observe will be an object. The subject can never be observed. The whole self-inquiry is a matter of precision. When we get very precise, we will never find an I. Accept that everything you perceive, even your most beloved self-image, is just a thought or a thought pattern. You can see it when it rises, you can perceive it when it's there, and you may perceive it's going away. If we look precisely, this mind is nothing but a mental event in your present experience. There is nothing like the mind. The mind is just a happening right now. Whatever you feel, whatever you can perceive, and let it just happen, nothing else. And there may be reactions, especially when it's emotional, what comes up, you may react. And also this, you can perceive and let go as something objective. the self cannot be approached directly. Because if we would find anything, it's just an object. You are already there. I could not talk you into not being here. It's impossible because you are here, but you cannot be objectified. So all you can do is to sift out all objects, whatever objects turn up, even your most favorite ones. If you look precisely, you will see this is a thought. This is not me. I am aware of this thought. And again, also turn the light towards yourself and be interested, what is it that is watching right now? And you may find some mental event, you may find some sensation, you may find this and that, but all you describe is another object. The Vedic parlance, neti neti. You give away, you give away, you give away, you give away, and in this process what you are becomes clearer. And this presence, this knowing presence is what you are. As soon as any thought comes, turn back to yourself by inquiring what and who is perceiving this thought. So this is what we have done. And now we want to bring this state of clarity and awareness into the outer perception. Come back to feel your whole body as a unit, as one homogeneous entity. And then be aware, still with closed eyes, that there is space around you. And then slowly, like a newborn child, slowly open your eyes, but stay in this perception of space. Rather than looking at something, remain in this spacious sense. And just remain in this inner restful alertness. It's nothing contrived. It is always yourself. It has always been yourself. So the daily practice is a remembrance, coming back to this stillness, this realization that you are formless. Come back to this stillness in the midst of activity. Just remember, I am observing something. I can breathe out and feel my feet on the floor. And then more and more you will realize that you are what you seek. It's a science that is very, very simple, and yet it's very, very profound. We can use our whole life, and in fact that would be the best, to use each and every little moment to inquire into that which is always there. This silent presence of God. For this Arunachala stands, for this Ramana Maharshi stands, and all those numerous saints that were here, and even those seekers that come here today, they yearn for this peace of presence.
Jaya Bhagavan, Jaya Bhagavan, Jaya Bhagavan, Jaya Bhagavan, Jaya Bhagavan, Jaya Bhagavan,